Defending Texas oil and natural gas for 14 years, I know about tough jobs. Being a mother made me even tougher. I'm Sarah Stogner, and I've always fought the liberal anti-oil politicians and the woke corporations bankrolling them. Because Texas has the solutions to Biden's runaway gas prices right here. I'm Sarah Stogner. If you want rigs in our fields, Midland over Moscow, and a tough conservative mama fighting for you, vote Sarah Stogner on May 24th.
So we're here with Sarah Stogner, who is running for Railroad Commissioner in Texas for the second time. And Sarah currently works as an attorney in the energy sector in Texas. And if you want to give us a brief overview of what that entails and what you do and a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so thanks for having me. My name is Sarah Stogner. I'm an oil and gas attorney now, represent various energy-related entities, I'll say, and landowners, stakeholders in the energy sector. And I'm running for Railroad Commission. And people say, well, that's weird. Yes, we're Texas, and the Railroad Commission has nothing to do with railroads. We regulate oil and gas, intrastate pipelines, and surface mining for things like coal and lignite.
Yeah, that was kind of my thought too. The Railroad Commissioner, obviously I put two and two together thinking, well, from what I've seen on a little bit on TikTok last year and pictures you put up all have to do with oil. So I figured there was some connection there. I thought maybe it was just, transporting the oil through railroad. I don't know. I'm an idiot.
Well, no, you're not, because that's actually how it started. So in the late 1800s, when people were getting railroaded, literally, the governor ran on a platform of saying, hey, we're going to have a constitutionally created agency called the Railroad Commission. There's three commissioners. They serve 6-year terms. So every 2 years, another one is elected and you get them on a rotation. And they were in charge of railroads. And then when oil and gas hit, Spindletop and all that in the early 1900s, they were lumped together. And then they stopped regulating railroads in, I think, 2005. But fun fact is that OPEC was actually modeled after the Railroad Commission. They were the original OPEC, if you will, of Texas when they started drilling oil, and everyone was just rushing to put their wells in the ground. And the Railroad Commission was like, whoa, we need to have spacing rules, and you can have production quotas and things like that. So OPEC is actually modeled after the Railroad Commission.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And that's something too, if you don't mind, towards the end, maybe we can get into OPEC and oil questions, because that's a big thing in our society, and that, with the price of gas and how that correlates and how that adds to inflation and the impact that has on people's lives, because oil is so important. It really is. And there's a lot of ins and outs I don't think people understand. Maybe you can give us some insight with you working in that industry, because you're actually in these fields that I've noticed. Like, you're not just an attorney, suit and tie, sitting in the office. You're actually out there, videoing a lot of the problems, getting all, yeah.
Yeah, if people are watching the video as opposed to just listening to this, I'm literally sitting here in a trucker hat and a camo shirt, jeans and boots, because I was in the field all day this morning digging up old plugged wells. So yes, I am out here every day.
And what made you famous? So last year, in 2020, not last year, 2 years ago, 22, correct? It must have been a notification on my phone. I don't know who wrote the article, but it said that this Republican politician running for Railroad Commission, whatever, had caused this stir because she had shot a video on TikTok where she had posed nude by one of these oil wells. Obviously, I click on it, and that brought me to you.
So
I went to your take. Yeah, well, it did, obviously. I mean, I remember thinking when I saw it, I'm like, this is probably one of the greatest marketing schemes I've ever seen. Because first of all, not only the balls it took in a Republican politics in Texas, like a conservative candidate, a woman too, stripping down and putting herself out there in order to draw attention to a problem, it had to have worked. Now, whether or not it did, you tell me. It obviously got eyes on
I
you.
made it to I made it. There was 5 of us in that Republican primary, and I made it to a runoff against the incumbent who outfinanced me. I didn't take any money during the primary. And then I made it to a runoff, and a rancher that I work with made a $2 million donation because consultants convinced her that if she wrote me a $2 million check, I would win. And I said, please don't waste your money on consultants and the political industrial machine. Let's take that $2 million. Let's go plug orphaned wells. Let's do some good with it. And we'll get earned media, because that's what I'm all about. I'm all about substance and earned media. And so I write articles, I'm published in, I was featured on NASDAQ. I've written, Newsweek. I'm writing editorials across Texas of trying to get attention. It's like, look, I'm very much pro energy, but let's be very real. One, the world runs on oil and gas right now. And two, there's no such thing as green energy. All consumption has a cost. And what we need is logical, reasoned grown-ups in the room who actually understand the operational realities of exploring for and producing energy in various forms. Fortunately, Texas is a wonderful place to do that. If on any given day, right, we're the third or fourth largest oil and gas producer in the world if we were a standalone country in Texas. And so, we're also leading the United States in wind and solar. And batteries get better and we get newer technology. And if we want to be really intellectually honest, we can talk about nuclear, right? So I think that we need to be having 100-year policy discussions, not 2, 4, 6-year election cycles of whatever's sexy and fun and hip at the moment. Because at the one hand, you've got the super majors who are saying climate change is a hoax. And at the same time, they're accepting billions of dollars in federal subsidies to go after direct air carbon capture in places like Australia, where Chevron has tried to do it and failed disastrously and not met any of their projected numbers. And so it's like, look, guys, we've got problems, but let's actually do things. Like, we've got a water problem, right? As you produce new wells and you drill these new long lateral wells, you have all this flowback water that comes with the oil and gas, and it's got really nasty stuff in it. And we have 19 million barrels a day in Texas that has to go somewhere. And right now, if you inject it deep, it'll start causing earthquakes. So we've started injecting it shallow, and it's coming into contact with literally hundreds of thousands of old legacy wellbores that are like 80 years old of steel and cement that just looks like Swiss cheese when it comes out of the ground. So, we've really, we've got to do better, because the world needs energy. As Americans, we need to be energy reliant. We can see the disaster that's happening right now, right, over oil and other places. And we need clean water, because I want to be able to take my grandbabies fishing and not worry about are we going to be poisoned eating fish from our lakes? Like, these shouldn't be. This isn't an either or. Like, we can have responsible energy production, because natural gas, when it's done right, is one of the cleanest burning fuels that we have, right? But again, it's supply and demand. It's the intricacies of getting it from the ground or the sky or wherever to the final end user. It's the processes that we use. And it's just complicated. And that's not great for political fodder, right? People want build the wall, or, don't kill babies, or, whatever the fun topic is of the moment. And I don't know. It's hard.
Now, this is a really important conversation. This is a great conversation to have, actually, especially around energy, because there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to oil. The green energy deal is one thing that I do find problems with in a lot of areas. I see it in Australia, where they're pushing it even more, and I see it in the U.S. There's a big push for solar. The government is handing out a ton of subsidies for it. My dad works for a very large family farm in Florida, and they just sold a 6,000-acre orange grove to be turned into all solar panels. And the problem I see with that is, you're going to basically deforest this grove, because it's trees that help offset carbon. 6,000 acres of it, only to
and
put out solar
stabilize
panels.
our domestic food supply. Yeah, all these other things, right?
Yeah, you take out agricultural land. You, by the way, no animals can live there. Where's the wildlife
Well,
go?
sheep, actually. Sheep, you can co-locate sheep and herds, goats, stuff like that. Maybe not goats, because they like to climb, but sheep definitely on with some grass to help soil stabilization. Like there are ways, but most people aren't doing that, right? You're totally right. Most people are taking an orange grove and taking the carbon that's being sequestered in the trees and in the ground and getting rid of that in exchange for clean energy. Well, guess what? Because the taxes and the cost for the farmer, he can't compete anymore. And his costs of doing business have gone up so much. And so he can sell it at a premium, and the solar people are getting a steal. And we're seeing it all over. I mean, that's a very
Mhm.
common occurrence.
Yeah, and like I said, we're talking about a 6,000-acre orange grove that you have to put solar panels on to get I don't know how much energy. But when you drill for oil, it's a small little area, confined area. But then you go and you look at these solar farms that they're putting in Florida. And by the way, I don't know, maybe I'm an idiot when it comes to this, but sheep in Florida, especially in Southwest Florida, probably wouldn't do very well. It's a little hot and humid for that. But I see the issues. I'm one of these people. I'm a conservative person. I don't like the government subsidy deal. I know there's maybe a time and a place sometimes for it. I'm all for giving tax cuts, but when you start subsidizing and trying to dictate demand, there's a lot of issues that come with that because money could be better well used when people themselves choose to put it somewhere where you fill your own demand because everyone's different instead of the government doing it for you. But there's just with the whole clean energy thing, I think, like you said, we're pushing forward a little too soon. Now, since we're on topic, what is our production like in the United States? I know we're producing a little bit more than we were under Trump when
Yeah,
he
and
hit his all-time highs.
I'm not the best person on production numbers. Like it's millions of barrels a day, right? I think we're something in the Permian, like 5 or 6 million barrels, or in Texas, 5 or 6. I don't know. Again, I'd have to pull those numbers. I didn't prepare for that, but it's a lot. But this is the thing, right? In the 70s and 80s, we had environmental concerns with refineries. So we changed the environmental rules. We have CERCLA, RCRA, things like this. And really, our downstream stuff, the refineries, haven't been able, they're grandfathered in on a lot of stuff. Upstream is too, right? But you're grandfathered in. And so we've got those facilities were engineered to handle the crude that they were getting before the frac revolution. And so in Texas, we have a lot of light sweet crude that doesn't have a refinery to go to. And the economics have bastardized the process so that we've got all this stranded gas, natural gas, that can't get to market. And people want the oil, but not the gas. And so they'll flare it. Well, then you can't flare it indefinitely. Thank goodness, because right, this stuff isn't going to be here forever and we do need it. But what I try to tell people is oil and gas are commodities, and just like any other commodity, if the rules aren't the same for everyone producing it, you can't make a profit. And so the reason I decided to run for office was I saw the Railroad Commission playing favorites with operators, with service companies, with landowners. And I'm tired of the crony capitalism because they're not making people do it the right way. And then people that try to do it the right way, like Pioneer is one of the good ones, they get subsumed. They're getting bought up by XTO. Denbury, another one of the good ones that tries to do it the right way. They've been bought up by Exxon, right? And so at the same time that these super majors are then assigning, they're literally giving away old wellbores where I am in the Central Basin Platform, not these new big sexy long lateral wells. These are 70, 80-year-old wells to 2,500 feet straight down. And they never got a good cement job. The whole thing is you have to put pipe in the ground and then you cement it up to protect your water zones. But think about, stabbing a cake with all the different icing layers and taking a big straw, like a boba straw, and twisting it around and then pulling it out. And then over time, now we're adding icing to different layers and it's all starting to ooze up.
And so there's a lot of regulatory issues here. And this is where you're trying to come in and fix some of this, having some of these common sense regulations, but also trying to make it a fair, more competitive area as well, which could
Yeah, we
help
already
drive
have.
down prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we already have a we already have the regulations on the books. They just need to be enforced. And what I'm trying to convince people is, look, Americans need to understand that there's a value to energy independence. And like California has decided that they don't want oil and gas anymore. And so they've bastardized it and made it so expensive and costly that you can't really do business in California anymore. But places like Bakersfield, where they are still producing in California, right? Like we should be developing more energy and effort into the places that have already kind of been destroyed, for lack of a better term, like the Permian, Bakersfield. We need to be careful where we drill. If you'd asked me 3 years ago, was there anywhere that we couldn't drill an oil and gas well? I'd say, no, you can responsibly drill an oil and gas well anywhere. And that's still true. But it's kind of like Jurassic Park. It's like maybe we should stop and say, should we before can we? And no, we shouldn't be building next to schools and churches. And what's happened is you have these old wells and these old fields that used to be in the middle of nowhere. And as suburbia creeps, and now in Texas, San Antonio turns into New Braunfels, turns into Austin, turns into Waco, turns into Dallas. Like that whole entire metroplex is just expanding to the point where you've got people's houses literally built on top of these old wells that are leaking. They're all leaking something. And we need very much real accountability to say, look, this is happening and we still need a viable oil and gas industry because the alternative is not acceptable, right? And so the left says shut down oil and gas and the right says drill baby drill. And it's like, no, we have to be somewhere in the middle of those two philosophies. And what's really frustrating is I'm in the oil and gas industry. I'm presenting at UTPB, their Society of Petroleum Engineers, in a couple of days to their students at lunch. Like there are lots of good people in this industry. There are engineers and geologists who understand the complications and what's happening and want to get to work. But it's going to take intellectual honesty because once the super majors say, okay, this is a real issue, like we have to start taking measures to stop the bleeding of future problems. You know what I mean? And it's going to cost, everyone's going to pay, right? Everyone's going to pay a little bit at all stages of this thing. But we need to all be in it together and say, yes, okay, if it costs more at the pump, because no one wants to talk about consumption, right? We continue to break limits of our grid is at capacity in Texas because we keep adding 1,100 new people every day. So we improve it and we add on it and we can't keep up.
Yeah, no, this is a great point because I was writing some of this stuff down yesterday. You were talking about consumption. I brought up, I asked you the question about production. But that's the other thing is too, it's amazing to me that right now, I think we're at like just over 13 million barrels a day, which is at an all-time record high. And then in the last time we were there, it was like November 2019, we were at 13 even roughly. And yet the price per barrel is about $15 higher now while we're producing more than it was back then. So there's obviously some international stuff because global's an international market too.
And the cost is goods, right? During COVID and everything, when lumber and steel and all those, everyone went crazy and started building out their houses because they were stuck at home. Like all of that impacts, gas was really cheap for a moment because people weren't traveling because the demand of consumers was low for gasoline, right? But the people don't understand the lag time of production and all the different economic forces that play on the price of oil. And it doesn't really accurately reflect what it costs to produce a barrel of oil. And it doesn't accurately reflect a lot of things. It's the way it's traded in the markets. It's a lot of people making predictions and buying things for financial reasons that's not just tied to supply and demand either.
Yeah. Because the futures market dictates a lot of that price, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember April. Yeah. So like, just to give you a little perspective, April 20th, 2020, the price of oil went to negative $37. And I was living in Midland, Texas. I have a friend that trades crude. And that was the closing day for the next month's buying. Right. And so it closed. And so that was the reaction to all of this And what I heard was AI that hadn't thought about it going negative. So literally, you had AI that was battling each other negative that didn't realize it was exactly doing that, in other words. And so I'm told that it shouldn't do something that extreme again because that was kind of an AI glitch, for lack of a better term. But we knew it was going to be bad. People thought it was going to be single digits. That was the number I heard. And again, it's because you had nowhere to put it. There was oil is you can store it in tanks, but you've got pipeline capacity takeaway problems. If you have plants that go down, if you have terminals that go down, it's so supply chain heavy and just in time, a lot of just in time stuff that yes, it can go
And
wonky and
it's a
awry
momentum
for
it's a
yeah.
momentum industry too. So when you shut down production like during COVID, because now that's scary. If you brought up about AI, that AI was able to do that's extremely scary. Because I was always under the impression it went negative because they were basically having to pay people to store it because they had so much they couldn't put it anywhere. But
They
and then
were.
yeah, and the other thing is, and I've actually said this. I'm glad you're kind of confirming what my theory was that I was telling people was when you go look at the profits, they always talk about how Exxon was making record profits, right? Well, maybe they were in a dollar amount now, but when you look at their margins were actually a little bit lower than they were prior to 2020. And the production part of it, there were so many different factors, but you have the futures that dictate a lot of the pricing, but you also have the fact that they had to shut down production, and then after 2020 they had to ramp production back up. They also because of
And it's not
supply
a tap,
issues.
right? Like these aren't, especially these long lateral wells, they have pressure, they've got a lot of force on them. And when you shut them in, especially for an extended period of time, that has a permanent impact on the future production of that well in a lot of cases. So I'm told from reservoir and production engineers.
And by the way, this is all skilled labor too. So it's not like you just go hire some Mexican down the street to, once they come in to do it. No, this is all like high paying, skilled jobs, that you
And
got to
they
fill these
fired a lot of
positions.
them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So during COVID, they laid off all these guys, and it's always boom and bust in the oil field, and people understand that that's a risk. But this time, people were like, "That's it, that's it." At the worst of the worst, all these service companies, all these operators, and the way that they contract around this stuff, a lot of people got screwed. You know what I mean? And so they don't come back. They're like, "No, I'm going to go to a different industry that treats me better."
Absolutely. Or better yet, even globally, how has some of the global policy, when we start talking about regulations, licensing, things like that, because like I said, yeah, production right now is at an all time high, but there's a lot of global factors that have caused that where the US is having to fill demand now because we have a conflict in Ukraine. They put sanctions on Russia. Now, I don't know. We'll see what happens with Israel. I have a theory about all of that, about how I think the Biden administration is trying to export inflation overseas, and they're doing it through conflicts and trying to. There's a whole theory I have behind this, but um,
Yeah, there's some interesting pipelines over there too.
yeah. So how does regulation and licensing, how has that changed under Biden? Is it hard, has he made it any harder to obtain licensing? Has he changed anything like that?
No, not really. So, because of the economy, it's the economy stupid, right? They're all talk, 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 but no, the actual policies, they closed some federal leases that they're like, oh, we're not going to lease this. Well, guess what? No one wanted that shit acreage anyways, right? Like, trust me, the reason it wasn't leased already is because no one wanted it. Because this is, places where it costs $100 a barrel to get oil, and no one's leasing. No one wants to go drill super deep water right now, right? Like that's $200 an oil stuff. And again, if it costs $100 a barrel of oil to responsibly produce it, then and I'm encouraged because internationally, places like Nigeria, the young people are angry that the government hasn't been enforcing their environmental rules. So they're cracking down on the super majors that are in Nigeria and Indonesia. And I hope that in Guyana they learn. Looks like Exxon got that deal backdoor through closed door meetings with the government, and I hope that the incredible amount of money that will be made that they can learn from some prior mistakes, because you try to save a little bit of money on the front end and it ends up costing everyone a whole lot more money on the back end. And unfortunately, with all of our orphaned wells, what you've got is then private profit and public cleanup. And I despise socialism. So,
Mhm.
that's it really, really irks me.
Gotcha. And that's a good way to put it is, if you're gonna do it, let them profit, but let them also be responsible for their mistakes. And as far as like a level playing field, it's not just domestically between these companies and enforcing the regulations between them and allowing competition, but globally too, and making sure that we have policy and regulation that incentivizes us to keep producing here and being competitive against other foreign drillers. So, that's a great topic of discussion. I think a lot of people don't know or don't really care. They just hear what they um hear like on Fox News or CNN, Biden has driven the price of oil up. And I always said that because the futures market plays a big role in it, that sentiment is where the president comes in. Where if he comes in with this climate driven ideology and they start seeing the optics, like he said with the licensing, oh, well, he canceled these licenses. They may not have been a big deal anyway. But if he comes in and when you actually look at the charts of the futures markets when he gets elected, price shoots up. And it's almost like, well, because they're preparing for the future, because he's pitching this certain type of ideology that is unfavorable towards oil. So investors are going to prepare for that. And so I always figured that sentiment was a big part of it, not so much the policies that the president puts into place.
Yeah, no, I would love to see an analysis. I have a theory that I've never tested. I think that oil and gas actually does better under Democratic presidents in the past 30 years because of that exact phenomenon that you just discussed. And I tell Republicans, I'm like, look, guys, the secret's out is actually, you know, we're going to be better off with financially with people. And we always have a saying, if you work in oil and gas, you never complain about the price of gas, right? Like we'd be happy paying $10 a gallon. um, I understand that that's not the reality of the rest of the world, right? But for those of us, and so, but we're also some of the biggest Republicans. And so when I talk to oil and gas folks, I'm like, look, if you're truly a conservative, you need to really start asking tough questions of your elected officials, because they do create these cute little catchphrases that are like, oh yeah, Biden's, just like the stickers at the gas station. And I don't know if you guys have these where you are, but there's a sticker on the pump, and it's a thing that says, I did that. And it's the higher prices, right? With Biden saying, haha, I did that. It's like, but he didn't. So, you know,
No, that's a good point. And I actually see this with the like big pharma. I think big pharma tends to do a little better because when you go and you look at who they give money to, they supported Biden more than they supported Trump. My general guidelines when I'm looking at politics is I don't work in politics. I don't get funded by anyone in politics. Nothing. I do this all on my own. What I say is my own opinion that I've gotten from my own reading and stuff. So what I think is like Biden just came out and he has his famous drug price negotiations for Medicare, and he's basically putting a coercive price cap on 10 new drugs in the Medicare market. And if these companies don't negotiate, then it's like a 1900% tax that he's going to put on them. And I'm like, well, that's terrible because these companies, anytime you put price caps on it, like they were talking about putting price caps on oil, which would have been horrible. They tried that in the 70s and it didn't work out very well. And then I'm like, well, hold on. They gave him all this money. Why do people lobby and give money to the government is to get more of a favorable return. So it's almost like these politicians go in there and they talk against these industries, and it's like reverse psychology. And these industries say, oh shit, we need to start giving them money to lobby to them to keep them from regulating us or to work in our favor. And it's not so much like I think, look, if the government didn't regulate, there'd be no lobbying, right? Because there'd be no reason to, because it'd just be Wild West style. Like, who cares? Because they're not doing anything anyway. Where the lobbying comes in is to either add regulation or to reduce current regulation or to not enforce regulation, like in your circumstance. So this is where the
yeah,
problem comes in. Like you said, it seems like it's reverse psychology where maybe conservatives who seem to favor oil and gas work the opposite and vice versa.
I don't even think they're that smart. I don't think they're smart enough for reverse psychology. This is what I think it is, and this is not me making this up. I read a book, and I highly recommend it. It's called The Politics Industry, and it looks at it's a Harvard business um, book from one of the Harvard professors and a woman who's studied all this in the political science realm. Incredibly good book. But what's happened is you'll appreciate this. You now have an oligarchy running a duopoly, which is the Republican and the Democratic Party. And once you realize that all it is a political industrial complex of consultants and journalists and fundraisers and donors, nonprofits, all PACs, all of it, just follow the money. I say if you know who somebody's having sex with and you know who they're getting money from, you know what motivates them in life. And if you follow those two things, you can figure out a lot about a person. And so, unfortunately, and I think we've seen really this exponential increase of it since social media, and it has good things. It's allowed candidates like me to exist. On the other hand, it's allowed this massive misspread of information, which is Ken Paxton, right? And so, like, let's get into this, which is we had Donald Trump, whose social media manager, Brad Parscale, bought a house in Midland, Texas, and is living in Midland, Texas, where Tim Dunn lives. He's one of the largest donors to the Texas Republican political machine. He funds all these different PACs, right? And I think Trump saw Ken Paxton as an opportunity to say, look, America, they're coming after strong conservative leaders. It's all a witch hunt. And he spent a lot of money. They were paying people $50 a tweet to tweet in favor of Ken Paxton. There's an entire Texas Monthly article on it if people want to search for it, with Russell Gold that wrote it, talking about. And so what you're doing is that's not getting labeled as political advertising. All of the ethical requirements are skirted. And you are really changing the hearts and minds of Republican primary voters. And right now in Texas, we have about 800,000 Republican primary voters who determine who's the Republican candidate on the November ballot, right? And we have not had a Democrat in statewide office since 1994 in Texas. And I'm not a Democrat, right? But after seeing what I saw in the Republican Party and realizing that all of the things that they claim to believe is just opportunistic grifting. And when you realize they don't really want to win and they don't really want to make a difference, they want to stay in power and they want to continue their political industrial complex. So the only way to break the duopoly, which is now really a monopoly run by the oligarchs, is to change the way that you tackle the primary system. And I think what we should do is open primaries so that all of the original candidates are on the ballot. You don't have to decide. Like when I lived in New Orleans, I lived in a very Democratic city, but I was always a registered Republican. So I could never vote on the primary candidates that were going to be, because there was no Republicans for local election in New Orleans, right? So, it's like when you're in places with one party rule, it really hurts our republic. And so I'm committed to trying to raise awareness, trying to inspire people that never thought they wanted to be in politics to get involved. It's like, look, you can have a publicity stunt being half naked on a pump jack. And as long as you've got the substance behind you, right? Like we can't play their game. This is guerrilla warfare. And you have to use guerrilla warfare tactics like viral tweets.
Absolutely.
So
I've been saying this. I was in a space the other day of people who you come to find out all work for the campaign when they're in these spaces because they're, just talking up, whether it's DeSantis, Trump, and they don't let you say anything. It's the craziest thing. And you see it and you're just like, oh my God, they're literally being paid by these campaigns. The money part, like the spending between Democrats and Republicans in 2020, there was like a $3 billion deficit the Republicans have to make up. And my common question is, look, whoever in the Republican campaign wins when we go to the general election in 2020, where are you going to make the money up? Because the Democrats have spent $8 billion to hire an entire army to go and operate these elections on the ground. And the answer to me, this is from a DeSantis person, said, Well, when you have a good candidate, people are going to donate. I'm like, you're kidding, right? They got a geriatric to run for office, and they got $8 billion behind him. Look at the guy from Pennsylvania, the guy that what's it like? They don't care about good candidates. There's more to it, and you just put it perfectly. Is the Republican Party does not want to play these dirty games. They for some reason, and they're just as bad as
Oh, I think they
the
do, though.
Democrats.
Both sides are right. They have whoever their donors are, and the donors control the PACs, and the PACs control the money, and they find the candidates, and they find the people in the party who they can manipulate, who they can control, who can be their puppets. And it happens nationally, statewide, both sides. We need term limits. We need campaign finance reform, right? Citizens United, I think, had terrible implications, and so I just think this is not at all what our founding fathers intended. John Adams talked about his greatest fear was ending in two parties that get nothing done, and people are motivated. There's a lot of psychology here, right? People are motivated by fear and anger, and so it's psychological warfare of giving people false things to get angry about, if that makes sense. Like, we've had transgendered people for time, eternity. Now it's this war on trans people. And it's like, guys, just live and let live. Let's get out of each other's bedrooms. Let's get out of each other's personal lives. Let's go back to the party of fiscal responsibility. And no one's interested in that. No one's interested in fiscal responsibility, private property rights, personal autonomy, law and order, like it. And why? Because why do we still have a border crisis? Follow the money. People like the cheap illegal labor. If they really wanted to shut it down, it would be shut down.
Yeah. Oh, great point. I mean, there's so many things, and I guess when I said the Republicans don't play the dirty games, no, they play it. They just don't do it efficiently in order to win because they're seem to be just wanting to retain the money inside of their your PACs and your nonprofits. Which, by the way, is funny because I brought up someone from Texas had asked me, well, what would you do policy wise, to help some of this corruption stuff? And I said, look, you place a tax on the nonprofits for any political activity that they do, right? Anything. You place a tax on any contribution they get from a labor union or another PAC or a 501c4 super PAC, whatever. Anything to do with politics, you tax. When they have an annual surplus, you put a 50% tax on the annual surplus. When you you go after them. Crickets. Why? Because not only crickets, but then they moved on and completely ignored it. And they're the ones that asked me for it, my idea. We'll come to find out they all work for the PACs or the Young Republicans in Texas or the Defend Texas Liberty, or they work for these nonprofits. And I was threatening their livelihood. And I think some of these people, like you work as an attorney, you have an actual job, but when you work in politics, and especially when you work in politics coming out of college and you've never done anything, you don't have a job. That's not a job.
No.
It
shouldn't be. It is, though. I mean, there are professional consultants, and that's what they do. So yeah, we've got to change it.